Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. So this week I thought I'd do a video about interviews. So over the past few weeks I've been interviewing a few of my friends from a range of different subjects, from maths, law, to rather niche ones like Egyptology and earth science, to give you a broad range of what interviews are like from a range of different perspectives. I hope that you find this video really useful, especially considering a lot of you will be getting your interview letters very soon. Good luck if you haven't heard yet, and I hope you do really well in your interviews. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. It's long enough anyway. Okay, so welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Billy. I study maths at University College and I'm from South London.
Hi, my name's Cecilia. I am a second year doing philosophy and psychology at UNIF.
Hi, my name's Meninda. I'm a second year studying computer science and philosophy at University College, and I'm from West London.
So I'm Izzy. I do classical archaeology and ancient history at UNIF.
I'm Flo. I'm a second year Egyptologist at UNIF.
Hi, I'm Rob and I study law here at UNIF and I'm in second year.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a second year studying biomed at UNIF.
Yeah, so my name's Will. I'm a second year earth scientist at UNIF.
My name is Ivan. I'm a second year biochemistry at UNIF.
I'm Fionn Price. I'm a first year undergraduate here at UNIF studying history and politics, and I'm from Swansea in South Wales.
Yo, Shamim Ibrahim, first year HISPOL student as well, UNIF College. Where am I originally from? Let's say West London.
I'm called Jessie. I'm at UNIF, second year English, and I'm from Surrey.
I'm Lena. I do medicine. I'm a second year at UNIF.
I'm Eleanor. I'm a second year PPist at UNIF. I'm from Newcastle.
Hey, so I'm Manu. I'm a second year engineer at UNIF, and I'm from Kent.
Okay, so what were your interviews like?
They went pretty well. I had 2 at UNIF and 2 at Pembroke, and I had the ones at Pembroke afterwards, so I sort of felt like they went better because I was less stressed because I'd already had 2 interviews. Yeah, so I had one for psychology and one for philosophy, and then one for philosophy, one for psychology for each college that I applied.
So I had a total of 4 interviews. I had 2 at Hertford College, one for computer science and one for philosophy. We had a meeting the day before our interviews started, where we got to talk to each other and got to talk to the tutors, and they told us that we'd have a test that evening. So we then went into a room and sat like a mini test, which I think only Hertford does. And then we then had computer science. So then the interviews for philosophy had some questions based on the test and then lots of logic questions. And the philosophy interview was sort of the computer science interview was then very maths based. And then at Balliol I had one interview which had 4 people interviewing me for both computer science and philosophy. It was sort of like a mixture of questions. And then I had a 4th interview on the 3rd day at Hertford, which was again a mixture of computer science and philosophy.
So I had 4 of them. The first one was at UNIF. I had 2 at the classics faculty and another one at Magdalen. So the first interview was led by ancient historians, and then the second was done by archaeologists. The third one was about sort of pottery handling, which was that was my favourite one. And the last one was sort of inferring information from textbooks, that sort of thing.
So I had 3 interviews, 2 at Christchurch, 1 here. The Christchurch ones were slightly more structured. They were both about 20 minutes long, and they were both split into 3 parts. So the first part was like a problem question. Second part was based on something that I'd read, and the third part was more of an ethical thing, things about actually how hospitals work and stuff like that. And then UNIF, I got given an article to read the night before, and then was quizzed on that for a bit, and then also had a problem question. Actually, no, I had 2 problem questions at UNIF. So one was estimating how much drug to give someone, and the other one was just basically working on how the nervous system works. And that was a bit longer. That was 40 minutes.
So I had 2 interviews. So my first interview, I was given something to read 30 minutes beforehand, which I had to read and then comment on when I went into the interview. And the second interview, I just had to turn up and I wasn't really sure what to expect.
Was that at a different college?
No, they were both here at UNIF.
So I had 2 interviews which both lasted for half an hour. We had a talk with our tutors before when they kind of outlined exactly what was going to happen. It's quite typical for English interviews to be split into 2. One was a poetry interview where we got given a poem for 20 minutes before to read through, and we got a chance to
like annotate it, so we had ideas of what we wanted to say. And then we went through it, and she kind of the tutor guided me through it, asking me about particular stanzas and pulling different images out for me to talk about. The other interview was far more personal statement based, so they had my personal statement in front of them, the two tutors, and they had highlighted different texts that they wanted to ask me about and to make me justify what I'd said on my personal statement.
I had 2 interviews on 2 consecutive days, and I didn't have like the timetable before I came here, but I think it was fine.
Yeah, they were quite a roller coaster. You kind of, I don't know, you're expecting it to be quite terrifying, and at first it is quite terrifying, and then you get more used to them, and you kind of realise that they're not examining you as a person, but more like your ability. They were kind of as I expected them to be, in that sense. So I applied to Somerville, and I had 3 there. I had 3 scheduled ones there, and then I had a 4th one at Univ. Actually, I had 2 at Somerville, then 1 at Univ, and then they rescheduled another one.
So I had 3 interviews. My first one was over at the Egyptology faculty. I had one at St Bennett's Hall, so that was kind of like, I guess, a pooling one. And then I had one here in college.
Okay.
Logistically, so I had 3 interviews, one each for philosophy, politics and economics, and they were all 15 minutes long, but we had like 10 minutes before to read some material. I only had interviews at Univ, I didn't have any more interviews. Some people had other interviews at other colleges. But
one for politics and one for history?
Yeah, and then for both of them you had like a sort of pre-reading to sort of read and critically analyse before you went in, and that would be the topic of the first half of your interview. You discussed that, what you thought about the texts, and you'd answer some questions about it and some supplementary questions as well.
So what were the kind of questions that you were asked divided into?
I had, so like for biomed you always get 2, you just get randomly assigned a second one. So I had like 2 20-minute ones at Teddy Hall, and then one like 40-minute one at Univ, which was quite long. One was a bit more like sort of scientific experiment based, so you like talked about an experiment and whether it was like accurate, and then one was more like just other stuff. They just were different people really.
I think they were underwhelming compared to the hype that everyone kind of makes them think that they are. They are just 30 minutes of academic interview, and they're not as scary. The tutors aren't as scary as people make out for them to be, etc. sometimes. So earth science is all done in department, which I think is different to most other subjects where they're done in colleges. So I had 2 interviews, and they only ever do 2 interviews for earth sciences. And the first one was with 2 fellows from Univ, and then the second one was 1 fellow from Teddy Hall and 1 from, I think, St Anne's, so 2 different colleges. So I just had the 2 interviews.
Thanks.
They were on similar topics, yeah. So I think with earth science they specifically tend to pick out bits from your personal statement, because it's such a broad subject, and obviously a lot of people haven't studied it at school. So whereas with maths they might say, compute this or do this, whereas ours was, because I had an interest in volcanology when I applied, it was specifically tailored mostly to volcanology, but it was mostly kind of A-level based content, just applied.
So I applied to Pembroke, so I got asked a lot more questions on personal statements. Like that made up the majority of the first half of the interview, and then second half it moved on to the kind of maths, physics problems. And then my second interview at Univ, it was full just problems, like nothing about my personal statement at all.
So how many interviews did you have in total?
2. Like I came in thinking I'd only have 1, and then they put up a notice saying that we have 2 interviews, so you don't really know until you get there.
What do you think was the hardest part of your interviews?
I mean, I was very nervous, so it was sort of calming down and trying to think rationally despite that stress.
Just being asked questions and having to come up with them on the spot. The interviewers were slightly intimidating. The philosophy tutor at Univ is like very clever, and I'd read up about him and knew that he was like this crazy clever guy. So I was a little bit intimidated. And so when you ask a question, you have to give your own opinion about something. You sort of think, like, clearly I'm going to be wrong, compared to his, like, all-knowing knowledge.
I think for me it was like when you first arrive at the interview and you're kind of waiting outside and it's kind of, you're not really sure what to expect and who's going to be in there and what they're going to be like, and that kind of like scary, the kind of like fear of the unknown before you go in is probably what I found worse. And then when you get inside and you actually like talk about, you know, you start talking to them, it seems like okay.
For me personally, it was trying to stay calm, because like obviously you're sort of putting yourself out there, you're quite in a vulnerable position, because you really want, well, I really wanted to come here. So I guess it was keeping level-headed and actually thinking about what the question was asking you to say.
The second interview, I didn't really understand like any of the first question, and I decided to like answer it quickly so that we can move on to something I could possibly answer correctly.
I think for me it was just calming my nerves.
To be honest, I think it was mostly knowing where to start with problems, because once you kind of knew where to start, the tutors would kind of guide you through the problem and like give you that train of thought, but it's just like initially coming up with a starting point to actually get the solution.
I think one of the hardest bits was not really knowing what to expect. So when I was waiting before my second interview, I hadn't had anything to read in advance. I hadn't met the tutors before. And so I think it was just really not knowing what to expect. And that creates a lot of stress and worry, which in hindsight wasn't really needed.
Probably the fact that I had no idea really what to say, and I got a couple of those moments where you just, you know, you should keep talking, but you also have nothing of value. So that was fun.
You go for that one first. Let me think.
For me, I think in regards to the history interview, it was the supplementary questions that followed regarding the pre-reading text, because obviously you can't prepare for those kinds of questions. You can sort of prepare for things that are going to be questioned about your personal statement, but that didn't happen in either interview for me. So I was answering questions that essentially I couldn't have prepared for in any way, and that was quite difficult.
I don't know, it was my background, it kind of got in the way. So for me it was harder because of what I was thinking about myself, more than, like, retrospectively now, if I look at it, my interviews weren't like the worst thing ever. Like, on the contrary, the second interview, my politics one, was so much fun. The social aspect of it for me, that was the hardest part. It was getting over the fact that this isn't like inner city London and I am doing this interview. I think that for me was the hardest part.
I think the hardest part about my interviews was sort of being able to not knowing when to stop talking. Like, I always felt like they weren't going to pause and sort of say and sort of like acknowledge my answer, because they didn't want to give away whether they thought I'd given a good answer or not. But like there were lots of bits where it was like they didn't sort of begin talking, so I felt that they wanted me to like add sort of elaborate on my point. So then I'd sort of be like saying but not really have the next point ready, and then I'd therefore just be rambling on. So I think I found it really hard to just stop when I had finished saying my point. And another thing that I found really hard was just sort of getting used to talking to people who are sort of like big names in their field in like a very casual way about a subject you enjoy, because like you just have to remember that you really enjoy that subject and they know that they're going to have to break things down for you.
The thing that I found most difficult in interviews was in the personal statement one. So I had written far too many texts down on my personal statement, like between 20 and 30, which was just too many for me to remember all the details of. And obviously they expect a lot of you and want you to know specific moments within a text, but when you've written that many down, it's really difficult to do that. So I had kind of cramming the night before to try and remember plot summaries.
What do you think in hindsight was your biggest mess up?
In my first interview, I panicked and I spoke really fast. And I sort of occasionally, like, I'd say something and then they'd just look at me like, what did she say? Because I'm just speaking so...
So there was a text about Athens and Sparta, and I completely forgot about the Peloponnesian War, which was just, that's the key moment for both of them, it really seems. So that was a bit awkward.
Like, I got quite a lot of stuff wrong. There was like a graph with a logarithmic scale. It took me maybe 10 minutes to realise that it wasn't linear.
Where I had to turn something from a log graph into a normal graph, and I completely forgot what logs were, so that wasn't great.
In one of my interviews, I was doing a mathematical calculation, and I very casually just said 4 times 4 was 12 and continued on my calculation. I obviously got the answer wrong in the end, but then my tutor was like, yeah, that's just because you've put 4 times... Well, the tutor was just like, that's because you've put 4 times 4 is 12 and not 16 at that point. I was like, oh no, they think I can't even do basic maths, but like things like that really don't matter.
I forgot some year 8 physics, and they were asking me for a formula that related pressure and force, and I couldn't give them anything. But like, if you do that, then they don't really mind, because they know that you would have known it.
So in my poetry interview, where I'd been given the text before to have a read through, I spent those 20 minutes very badly. I analysed all of the little details in the poem and somehow managed to forget to think about what the whole poem meant and what the whole idea was, which obviously I could piece together quite quickly because in the interview. But when the first question in the interview was, so what do you think about X? I had no idea, because I'd just gone into too much detail and not into the general.
I think I probably could have done better in my politics interview than I did. I think the economics one went badly, but probably was quite a true reflection of actually the fact that I knew nothing about economics. Like I didn't say stupid things, I just genuinely said what I thought, whereas I think for politics I probably could have done it better. Like I don't think I just said anything like there wasn't like a line that I said that was wrong. I think I just could have thought about it a bit more.
It was more of what I didn't say that I regret as opposed to what I did say. In one of them I got asked a question and kind of sat there for a good far too long, just kind of sweating, not really saying anything, and kind of panicking about the question as opposed to like thinking about it and like speaking through what I was thinking.
To be honest, I think it was not actually saying everything that came to mind. Like maybe I just think an idea was too simple or it's completely wrong, and then like I just didn't bother saying it. So there were like times where I was just sat in silence for a bit when I probably should have just said what was on my mind, and then the tutors would have been like, this is wrong, or like, you're nearly there.
What were some examples, some of the questions that you were asked in your interviews?
So mine was very much like problem sheet based. So I was given a problem sheet beforehand and I had like half an hour to prepare it, and then I was just asked with those asked about my answers to those questions. But one of them I remember, we were talking about knowledge for the philosophy interview at Pembroke, and it was quite laid back. It was quite nice. So they asked me, because they knew I lived in France, they asked me if you saw François Hollande in a shop, you thought you saw François Hollande in a shop, and then so you told your friends, I saw François Hollande in this shop, and it turned out you were actually looking at a paper cutout of François Hollande, but he happened to be standing behind that paper cutout, so he was actually in this shop, but you didn't actually see him. Would that count as knowledge? Because this whole thing about knowledge being justified true belief, it was true because he was there, it was justified because I saw a picture of him, and it was my belief, but was it actually knowledge? That was an interesting question, I thought. No, I mean, I hadn't done psychology before. I was just given a study, and I had to answer questions like, how did they do this in the study? Like, how would they do it differently? I think it was about infants recognising of preference towards human faces rather than monkey faces, and how that actually develops. So when you're a very, very young baby, you don't have a preference between these two. But when you reach about, I think, 4 months old, you start having a preference for human faces rather than animal faces. How could we tell if this was part of a broader sort of specialisation of all the senses towards sort of human, your own family, your own nationality, all that, and not just like individual things?
So for one of them, I got presented with an Egyptian funerary stealer, and we were discussing maybe perhaps thinking about the context of it, the importance of certain bits of the imagery, and also part of it was translated. So obviously you're not expected in your interviews to be able to read Egyptian, but how you engage with the text is kind of quite important. So by reading it in translation, we could do that.
So they were generally applied versions of A-level, I think generally physics as well, if I remember. So a lot of them would be taking concepts from physics that they thought we might have already done, and applying them to some kind of area, such as, so for example, if I had a volcanology one, and they were asking about if there was an eruption and there were things in the atmosphere, and kind of can you calculate the velocity of the winds around the Earth from the spreading of the. It's kind of, you know, dumbs down to physics and then prompting you along the way. So it was kind of basically A-level physics or A-level chemistry, but applied to different subjects. I had what's called a sediment core, which is basically where you drill into the Earth and they pull out a chunk of it. And they placed that in front of me and said, "What's going on here?" But they knew I had never done geology, so they weren't expecting much. I think I told them what they wanted to hear. But again, it's about seeing how you think, and they were fine if I asked them a slight question to clarify the question and things like that, and they gave you help along the way.
The material I was given was to do with criminal law. So it was to do with murder and when it would be necessary to commit murder and if that could be a defence.
Okay, cool.
So it was something that I was entirely unfamiliar with.
And what were the kind of things do you think they were looking at? Was it more like analytical or...?
Well, they definitely weren't looking for any previously known facts about the law. They were just asking you to read the case of the facts and the judgment, and to see what you got from it, because some of the language was quite difficult to understand, and then how you could apply that to different factual scenarios. So I was asked why I wanted to study law in both interviews, which I thought was quite surprising, because I would have thought that would have only been asked once, but it was asked in both. I was asked how to define, in my second interview, 3 very closely linked words, and if I could pick apart the differences between them. And then I was asked to apply those words to a different context. And they kept altering the scenario and to see whether or not I could adapt to that, or if I would get to a point where I wasn't really sure what to say anymore.
For my univ one, we had like an article, and they like asked a lot about whether you thought like the methods they used were like reliable and stuff. What else? Just like general stuff in biology, so like the Krebs cycle came up in one of them, and like some stuff about stimulating nerves, but it was kind of stuff like, so it was about like stimulating the vagus nerve, and like you kind of know from A level what the vagus nerve is, but like I don't think really sort of, you vaguely cover neurotransmitters, and then they were talking about like, why is this making the heart beat faster, like what effects that having on the cell, like into more detail. But then it was okay if you like got the wrong answer, but it was an answer that could have possibly worked and stuff, and they like guide you through it.
Well, it was quite weird. Some of them, so one of them I had wasn't actually, it was more of like a replica of a tutorial than an actual interview, where I went in and the tutor started explaining some area of math that I've never seen before, and then he kind of like asked me a few questions about that topic, having like walked me through some new content. Others, for maths, I didn't get any. I got nothing on personal statements, nothing on why maths or why Oxford. It was just all like technical questions about maths. It would be like one big long problem. Usually it's less like a specific topic in maths. It's more like the way you think through a problem. So I don't think you can really predict the topic that will come up. It's just more, you have to get used to that kind of rigorous logical process and being able to like vocalise.
So in my philosophy interviews, I was asked about things like the ethics of abortion, and there was like sort of like a text that we had seen before, and we just had to go over it. It was like, so one of them was about abortion and just generally our standpoint, like my standpoint and what I thought about it, independent on that scenario. I think it was something called like the winter child and the summer child, and whether, and that's what the scenario was called. And then the rest of the philosophy interviews are heavily logic based, so lots of like propositional logic problems, like, so if all boys are this and all girls are this, what would you say about this, and are these statements true, does this entail this? And I think a tip for that part is just constantly keep talking about your assumptions, talk about what you're assuming. So if, for example, if they said if all boys are tall and all girls are tall, and they asked you if the following conclusion, therefore all people are tall, is valid, I would be like, yeah, that's valid on the assumption that all people are either boys or girls, which may seem like an obvious assumption to you, but I feel like you should just say it so they know that that's like a good practice to have. And then my computer science interviews were about binary trees and like the length and depth of a binary tree and how you'd calculate things like that. I had no idea because I'd never done binary trees before, and I told them that, so they explained everything to me from scratch, and so we like had to derive what in hindsight now know is like the big O notation of certain functions. So we were doing things like that. I found it really difficult, and that was probably my worst interview. I was also asked a lot of like basic probability questions, permutation, combination, things like that. Didn't have any sort of graph drawing, no sine graphs or anything like that. And then my last interview, I was asked about a range of things from logic puzzles to different ethical scenarios, to things from my personal statement. So, for example, I talked about an EPQ. I talked about an EPQ that I'd done, like Cantor's continuum hypothesis and the diagonalization argument, and I was asked to explain what the diagonalization argument was. I was also asked about different sort of sorting algorithms and why things are more efficient, and I had never come across any of these before, but like they would explain to me on the spot.
So I had some basic DNA questions like restriction enzymes. I also had I would say basic math questions like concentrations, calculating the amount of, I think it was, receptor on a cell. And for the second interview, the question I had no idea about was about iodine concentration in tadpoles. I still don't know the answer.
Was there anything in your interviews that you wish you had prepared more for, or like that you knew you could have asked had you done any more preparation, or was it all just stuff on the spot?
There was some organic chemistry in my second interview that I could have answered if I had revised it, but I had no idea that it would be included.
The first one I got, I remember my my history interview, there was something about Nazi Germany in the interwar period. I remember that because I remember the word interwar. And then it was something about, I remember the intelligentsia, because that's the question they asked me on it, and I was like, what?
Yeah,
I felt so dumb, but it's fine, so whatever, I'm here now.
Yeah, it was like they wanted us to assess the state of Central European countries during the interwar period, and it was a topic that very few of us had actually come across before, so it made for interesting conversation. I remember having one really probing question in my politics interview, where the lecturer asked, what did I think was the most pressing political matter of the age? And that's quite a loaded question, but...
Did you say Brexit?
Yes, I did, yeah. I had a feeling. Yeah, but more specifically, how Brexit and whether or not Parliament were going to vote on Brexit, because it wasn't a binding referendum, how that had implications for the theory of representation.
Do you know what it was? It was like part A of the whole thing was kind of like a comprehension. So they'd give you a handout, you'd read it, you try to like think whilst you're reading it, you try to annotate anything that you think might come up as a question. And then the second part of it was like either one, they'd pull out an essay that you've handed in before. So like I handed in one of my Crusades essays. I handed in one of my Germany essays from my A2 year, and they pulled it out and asked me questions about why I structured it the specific way. And then it was kind of like they might pick some points about your personal statement or something like that. So it was kind of like a part A and a part B.
A couple of the ethical ones, they gave me a scenario where there were like loads of different patients and different conditions and things, and they were like, who would you look at first, what would you do, that kind of thing. And then the problem-based ones are more things like how do you think this particular nerve slows down the heart and all that kind of thing. More like actual physiological things like that. There was one mathematical one I got, but all the other ones were more like logic-y, like they were trying to work out if you could see the next step in the process, basically. They gave me this thing about the ear, and they didn't tell me it was about the ear, so I had to like kind of guess what was going on. It was more like logic-y, I think, in general.
So in the poetry one, I was given really specific questions that were about kind of stanza by stanza, what do you think of this line? What do you think of the rhyme scheme? So that was pretty kind of self-explanatory. Whereas the personal statement one was obviously really specific to me, because they were asking about books that I'd said I'd read and about poems that I said I'd read. So apart from the personal statement questions were pretty easy to kind of navigate my way through, because I'd read the text, so I knew what I could respond to them, and if they asked me about something specific, I could say something of value to respond to. But one requirement of an English interview is they have to ask you one that's about literature as a whole. So I was asked about what I thought the difference was between a play and a television adaptation of a text. And it's that kind of question that can potentially throw you, because they're just trying to see if you can think about literature as an entity in itself rather than about specific texts, and just making you think beyond probably what you've been taught at school. But they're not expecting too much. There's no right or wrong answer. You just have to say something potentially original that you can think about for that idea.
Didn't get asked anything about a personal statement. It was just go and you look at the text. So for philosophy it was I think it's got a name, the problem, but it's some problem with doors and money behind them. And there was 5 or 6 different stages with different coloured doors and different clues given to you, and you had to work out which door had the money behind. So you had 10 minutes to look at that, and then you went in and you just went through all of them, and they kind of the tutor sort of didn't really say anything, sort of said stuff at some of them, or sometimes he was just next one. For politics it was a bit different. We had a bit of text. I can't remember what it was. It was political theory text that we talked about for a bit, and we had to unpick. And then he asked me to think about a team and talk about the politics of I talked about a hockey team at school, and we just had to talk about the politics within that and interesting things within that. And then for economics it was, this problem has a name as well, but I think it was a version of the pirate's problem. I think that's what it is. But it was in the sense of there's a certain amount of money and you've got to divide it between everyone, but everyone should have money with regards to their superior, the hierarchy. But also you can't, you have to do it in a way that doesn't piss anyone off, but also that is representative, and that everyone wants it, and if the first person rejects it, then the next one, it goes to the next person. I can't really remember, but there was that. I was really, really bad at that.
It was essentially kind of an extension of A-level problems. It's all A-level concepts, but obviously just in a different scenario, scenarios you haven't seen before. So I got asked several on a motion of a ladder falling down a wall, and you had several statements which you had to essentially just work through and say whether they were true or false. And then you had other ones so you had something called 6 degrees of separation. So essentially through 6 levels of friends you will know everyone in the world, and you essentially have to work out how many friends you would need to know everyone in the world through that many degrees. And essentially that's a basic kind of tree problem, but you wouldn't actually have encountered that before, so it's just a bit different. The majority of it was physics. We only had basic maths questions, just whether you understand the kind of key principles, not just learning how to do it, but if you actually understand what's going on. And then the majority of it were kind of electricity, mechanics, that kind of.
And do you have any final subject-specific tips that you'd want to give anyone applying for your subject?
Maybe just read. For psychology, definitely read some studies, get used to the structure of studies. I hadn't really read any. I'd read a good book to read is Bad Science. It sort of talks about when studies go wrong and how we could have a more robust or less robust study. So knowing sort of the main ideas of what makes a study better or worse is quite good, because then they ask you stuff like that in the interview, which was quite good.
Learn how to think critically. So they don't expect you to know about Egypt stuff. I mean, I really didn't. But they want to see that you can engage with something. So, for example, with a sore subject like a funerary stela, perhaps think about the significance of different aspects from stuff you do know. Perhaps you did history or you did a language or something. So using the skills that you do have and applying them to an Egyptian or ancient source is a pretty cool thing to be able to do.
So when I was in year 12, I realised that I didn't know a lot about politics or current affairs. And so whilst tutors aren't really looking for pre-existing knowledge, I think just to have an idea of the British Constitution, the fact that how judges play a role in that system, in addition to the legislature, so the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and kind of how the framework works. So you can read lots of introductory books which are on Staircase 12, which I would definitely recommend.
One of the key things is about picture questions. So I think you should just get sort of familiar with finding just an object online looking at it, actually the British Museum website's really good for this, looking at it, sort of covering up the information and then just talking about it. So like I had a picture of a coin, but it really is as basic as just saying, this is a coin, it's made of metal, it has this sort of pictures on it. So it's just getting comfortable with stating the obvious because they want you to do that.
And do you think there's any other sort of interview preparation that you would definitely recommend people do before coming up?
I think definitely just do as much reading as you can to get not to do sort of like notes and everything like that, but just to get a vague knowledge of lots of areas, even if it's quite thin.
I would say that especially for philosophy, if you're having an ethical debate or you're having and you realise that your tutor's points kind of make more sense than you, don't be afraid to change your argument. I had written a short answer in one of the tests on the first day that we got here about that ethical dilemma, the moral and ethical dilemmas with abortion. And then when I went back to bed that night, I kept thinking about it and realised some of the arguments I made were just wrong. And then the next one in the interview, one of the first things I said was, I thought about it at night and I now think this. And they were like, oh, tell us more about it, because they had gone through the test and they want to ask me some questions. So it's very good to show that you can understand other arguments and not be too rigid. But if you do think a point is valid, definitely make that point across and explain why you think so. But for the more computer science side, especially for mathematical subjects, I would say definitely literally say what you're thinking out loud. In my entire interview, I kept saying, now I'm thinking this, and now I'm thinking this, because I wanted them to sort of latch onto anything that could have potentially been right. I didn't want me to have a thought, sort of neglect it, but then that actually be the right thing. So keep talking, keep telling them what you're thinking.
Know what the Krebs cycle is, because I didn't know what the Krebs cycle was till the day before when I had a mock interview, and they were like, how do you not know what the Krebs cycle is? It's good to know a bit about the course, but you probably do anyway if you're applying. But one of them I got asked why I particularly liked this biomedical science degree compared to other universities. So it would look really bad if you don't know anything about the course.
I think generally they're looking for an interest and an ability to apply what you do know. So I know people that when I was speaking to people in my year who spent ages researching this and that and the other two with geology, and to be honest, if you know it, you know it, but if you don't, they don't mind. And I think you just need to brush up on your A-level stuff, make sure that you're absolutely sound on your maths, your chemistry, your physics, whatever you've done. And inevitably, if you've applied for Earth Sciences, you will have an interest in it. And whatever you've mentioned on your personal statement and things like that, they'll probably pick up on. The only other thing I would say is there's a thing called Fermi problems, which some people were familiar with before they went to interviews. I'd never really heard of them. They're quite big on those in Earth Science, and I think I know a few people that had those kind of scaling questions in their exam or in their interviews. So that's definitely worth having a look at, because it kind of is a good way of seeing how you think.
You should definitely research the tutors from the college, and try and read some papers probably, or some more detailed stuff on their subject, because you get asked what you find interesting, and you might go and say some of the stuff you read to kind of stand out from the crowd.
Number one, if in your personal statement you said you read said book, read said book. Because if a question comes up and they're like, so what does Jean-Jacques Rousseau say when he talks about the state of nature, and you're there read the books that you've said you've read.
You don't need to know them off by heart, but just as long as you have, a good grasp on what you've read and you can demonstrate that you've understood it, you're going to be in perfect stead. They understand when you come to interviews, it's a stressful situation, and sometimes you may know the answer to the question, but you will struggle to get it out, or you may draw a blank, and that's all part of the interview process, and they're more than happy to accommodate that. Yeah. They understand that people are nervous and they know that people are going to be scared, but
if you are midway through a sentence, or the person asks you a question and you're like, what does that mean? You can ask for clarification, which is totally normal. And also, if you're really trying to think about what you're going to say, you can politely ask for a minute. That's what I did. I was like, can I have a minute to think about that, please? And then gather your thoughts and then say something, instead of projectile vomiting.
Definitely. They're more than happy to give you all the time that you need in order to answer the questions that are being asked of you. And they're more than happy to let you change your argument as well if you find that halfway through an interview, like I did, that I was definitely arguing something that it wasn't necessarily the best and the strongest argument to make. I changed my mind halfway through my interview and said, excuse me, is it okay if I take that back and retract it? I don't think what I've said is correct. And they were more than happy to let that happen.
If you feel like you're out of place, number one, getting an interview is like an amazing thing in itself. Like, forget getting in or getting out, like getting to the point where on paper,
definitely,
or like, for example, if there were no interviews, you would have kind of gotten a place, right? That's an amazing thing. So just think, if you've gotten that far, then technically you have as much chance, or you deserve as much as anyone else who's sit in these interviews to get a place. So just think that, just put your all in. And plus, because it's kind of like a tutorial now that we're here, like in the sense that there's like one of the tutors or two, and then they'll chat to you, blah, blah, blah. I think of it as just like a conversation. It's you can have a lot of fun with it.
Definitely.
Especially when there's open-ended questions, especially for politics. Like, the open-ended questions, just roll with it, as in whatever you thought doesn't have a lot of emphasis in your studies. Like, for example, in A-level, it was very black and white, like you do Eurocentric stuff. When they asked me questions and I went to the Middle East with it, they were like, why'd you go there? And I felt like that conversation in itself just can show you how open you are.
I'd definitely say get used to talking through what you're thinking. Like, because with maths, you're always sat there, you're like writing it, you're thinking in your head, and you're not like explaining what you're thinking. Whereas with interviews, what I found, what they really like to see is you like talking through what was going through your head. And so just like practice that with other people, like trying to explain to them, like, right, I'm thinking this, so does that mean that? And like that whole kind of like speaking and like, vocalizing your thought process, I think, is what would really help.
First step I would say is, like, don't be afraid of what they expect of you, because they don't know what kind of schooling you've had. They can't expect you to know like really detailed literary devices, because you just might not have been taught that. So therefore they aren't asking that of you. They're just asking from what you know, how you can bring kind of interesting ideas to the table and add something of value to a discussion. So don't worry about that. But one thing that I would say that everyone can really easily do is, every text that you've put on your personal statement, obviously you've put an opinion about it in that statement, but then have something extra that you can say about it that's interesting and that shows why you are both passionate about the subject and how you can kind of analyse in great detail. So it's just something that, whatever they ask you about that text, you could probably bring it to the discussion and it would be of value.
If you're going to read things, read what you're interested in, because there's no way that you'll remember or be passionate about talking about things when you just think that they sound clever. And also would recommend like refreshing your knowledge of like basic systems, I guess. So things like how nerves are transmitted, how nerve impulses are transmitted, stuff like that. Building blocks that might come up that you might have done in school. They probably won't ask you anything like really, really niche, but being confident in your general reasoning ability and your general knowledge of biological systems and chemistry. Chemistry, there wasn't a huge amount actually, it was more biology for me.
Mainly just read what you're interested in, because the more you read, and definitely read stuff that you find difficult to read, in terms of that you have to think more about, because if it's really easy for you to read, you're not thinking about it as much. I got really stressed and I was like, I have to read, utilitarianism and like Hobbes and all this like really complicated, really deep philosophical and political stuff. But I think it's better to just read what you're interested in, but actually think about it and actually form your opinions on it.
As I said, like, know everything from first principles. Like, don't just learn the thing, know where it comes from, how you get there, and then you should be able to work through any problem.
Did you think you were going to get in?
Absolutely not.
Oh, no.
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 Not even a little bit. In fact, I was so convinced that I almost forgot when the results were coming out, because I was like, I'd literally just written it off. I was like, oh well, never mind.
I remember getting my offer. I'd just been in a maths class, I got my offer and I rang my mum, and on the phone I said, Mum, I've got an offer, I've got in. And she asked me to reread it to her because she actually didn't believe that I got in.
When my granddad left at Christmas, he was like, been hearing about your Oxford interviews from your mum. He was like, looks like it's somewhere else we're going to.
It was like 50-50, because my first one was really good and my second one was really bad, so I didn't know.
I didn't think I'd I had a bit of hope that I might, there was a chance, but I don't think, I've always said like I only really applied to Oxford because I didn't have enough places left on my UCAS. I'd only filled in 3 of the places, and then so when you got the interview, I was really surprised and blah blah blah. So I was kind of just seeing how it went, and I was fortunate enough. But yeah, I didn't really think I'm definitely not going to get in, or I definitely am. I just thought we'll see how it goes.
Getting the letter that said, "Oh, we'd like to see you for an interview," I was like, "It's a lie. Clearly, it's a lie."
I mean, looking back in hindsight, it's you evaluate how you felt. But at the time, I thought that my interviews hadn't gone appallingly, and I knew that there were areas I could have improved upon. But overall, it was a mixed bag of sort of feelings and emotions, and I felt confident that I did my best, and I'd hoped from there that it was going to be a positive result.
So I was pretty sure that I wasn't, and then the next morning I got called for another one, and I was like, oh, okay, odd. And then that one went really well, so then I was a bit like confused, like, oh, I don't know, went badly at first, but then had another one. Does that mean like I'm on the edge, or does that mean they really like me, or they really don't like me? So I was kind of like a bit confused and didn't think too much about it, so I wasn't overly optimistic or under, so I don't know, I was middle of the park, I'd say.
No, I did not. I thought it had gone so badly. I was the only English student who was not asked for a second interview at Univ. There was a whole list up on the notice board, and I remember going and seeing Jessica Smith, you can go home, and everyone else having a second interview in colleges that they were going to go to. So I thought, well, that's it. They think you're terrible. So I walked down the high street crying as I left. But then it was fine, so you never know.
After my second Christchurch interview, I thought I had no hope at all. And then got a good night's sleep, and my Univ one went better. That was like the next day. So I hadn't completely ruled myself out, but I don't think I was like, yeah, I've got this.
I didn't really know. I think I came out thinking that I'd probably done the interviews as well as I could, but that I still didn't really know whether I'd get in or not. After, you don't find out your TSA results until after you find out whether you got in either. So I knew that my TSA was good enough for me to get an interview, but I also didn't know how good it was. So it was kind of a combination of like how well the TSA had gone as well as my interviews. So I was still like really unsure.
My first interview, absolutely not. Like I just walked out and I was like, there was no chance of me getting in. Second interview, I was like, it went better, but then again, like it could go either way. You could have done everything right, or you could have made a massive error. They don't really give much away in the interview, so it's just a waiting game to find out.
But you never know, because even if you do well, there could be someone that does better than you, and you just don't know that.
I did not think I was going to get in. After my last interview, which I went on for over an hour, I was so sure that I wasn't going to get in, because I kept thinking to myself that if the interview's gone on for more than an hour, that means they still haven't decided whether they want me or not. And had they known, they would have stopped the interview, and if they didn't, they kept asking questions. So like, I was just so confused by the end of it, because I was like, why did Hartford interview me again? Why was it for an hour? So I just kept second guessing everything. And so my advice for that is just don't think about it, because the process is very ad hoc. Like sometimes they may give you extra interviews because they need to standardise, and you may be a really good applicant. They need to show another college that applicant is really good, and you just don't know what's going on. So I really didn't think I was going to get in, and when I got that acceptance letter, I cried. I broke down to the floor and cried for about an hour, and then realised that I should start studying to meet the condition.
So thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I tried to get as many subjects as I could. However, if there are subject-specific questions from any of the subjects that were mentioned here today, or any other ones that I haven't mentioned, put your questions in the description box below, and I will try my best to ask a friend or get people to respond to your questions in time for your interviews. Special shout out to all of my friends that helped making this video. It would not have been possible without them, and the amount of times that I annoyed them, pestered them to try and get this video out. Thank you, and thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, click that like button, and leave any questions that you have in the description box below. Bye guys.